right. That was a big success, guys, last week. Big
Hey,
one.
that's great.
Yep. Yep. So I'll give you a quick update. We had about 3,400 people registered for that one. We had 1,200 people watching live, and we started a YouTube channel from that. So it's called The Data Advocate.
Perfect.
So just on that video, we've had about 500 views on it. So people who want to rewatch it. And we finally got the podcast up on Apple. I don't know why it kept on rejecting the picture, but we had to change the picture up so that it finally got up. So we have a podcast now, this one on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere else. So that one's now everywhere. And we sent out the email last week on Friday or Thursday. I don't remember. I think it was Friday. And then we're planning on every week sending out an email that leads everybody back to the data advocate, and then through an article that's written in there, and then also the podcast for the week.
Perfect. That's
So
great.
that's what we'll do for now. And then the next week, we're planning on doing another live session with the webinar setting, kind of like 17th pass. Now what? Right? And so whatever you guys want to talk about there, I'm assuming how we are seeing people now start working with different states, different scenarios, trying to get commission on the buyer side, what this looks like. And
Well,
then
I had a question about questions and how to handle questions, because in a way it'd be a good resource to be able to have some real brief questions and answers. And I tried that just in draft form, and there's a couple of good questions that I think some of them we can cover, today. But
okay.
as far as the webinar next week, some people use it in the promotion to say, that if there's some questions you'd like to have covered, let us know. That way we can see, oh, wait a minute. Now we can see where there's some intense interest. So I think maybe if you can follow through on that one, Tristan.
I'll do that. Let me write that in.
Okay.
Questions.
And I don't know if there are any today in that long list that I had of questions that you sent me that you kind of wanted to handle, Tristan. I know I talked with Saul about, the one that gave me a little bit of trouble, and he has a pretty good approach to it. Question number 23.
The appraisal one?
No, the appraisal one, actually, we came back with some good comments from Melanie, in which she said, hey, it's basically appraisers look at it as being baked into the price. And so, and they actually don't go on their own and make direct calls like some people thought that they would to agents about the appraisal. So as long as it's within a range, I think she had 2 appraisals. As long as they were within 10% of each other, that would be acceptable.
Okay.
If it was a relocation, they would want 2 appraisals. They would want it within a 5% range. So nothing hard and fast, but I thought that was interesting.
That was.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, now I remember number 23 after I just read it. What happens if the buyer has no money but can't put 0 in the buyer's broker agreement? I wanted to run the scenario before we start. So here's what we thought, because I ran it by the team. Now we would have we have to have an amount, because then we have to go to the seller with that amount, and it can't be negotiated at that point. Says it has to be this amount. We know that. Then the seller can come back and say, no, we're only going to pay you 2, right? Or they can come back and say, no, we're not going to pay you anything. That's the worst case scenario. Then we go to the buyer, and even though it says 2.5% or 2% or 1%, doesn't matter. Oh, I understood the whole NAR settlement thing to say that we can negotiate with the buyer still, because everything is negotiable. So at that point, I could go to the buyer and say, you know what? I can't help you at this point, but You can go directly to the listing agent at this point and have him help you. Because everything is negotiable. We found that to be a gray area, so we're like, we don't know. So that's why I'm going to you guys.
Go first, John.
I figured it was a way in. It's like saying, well, here, Mr. Saul, I'm going to charge you 2.5%. And if we get it from the seller, amazing. If we don't, listen, everything's negotiable. I'm going to come back to you. If you can't pay it, we'll figure something else out. If they come back with 0, you can't pay anything, I'll just give you directly to them. If you want to go that route, if you really want.
First off, though, you have to decide how you want to handle mentioning percentage.
Yeah.
Going to have a lot of people say, whoa, 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 you can't say 2% or 3%. So some people use the algebraic formula, X equals Y plus 1. But I don't think there's an issue or problem, and I don't think Saul does as well, but the audience has been trained to get up and walk out when somebody mentions the word percentage commission.
Yeah, you're right.
So we should write this down, because this takes steps. And there's some understanding and foundations that we have to all agree on as we move forward to understand these steps. Everybody's assuming that you have to get, and we talked about this last week, I think, Tristan. Everybody's assuming that you have to get the ultimate commitment from the buyer the first time you meet them.
Right.
Or you can't show them real estate. Now, here in California, I've got like 55 pages of documents. And which ones am I going to go through? And which ones am I going to explain? And which ones am I going to ask the buyer to sign? And which ones do I even understand myself at this point? And so to get people to commit, the smaller the commitment, the easier it's going to be to get them to sign something.
Yeah.
And so that's a premise, but I find that premise to be true pretty much overall, that people will make smaller commitments rather than larger commitments. And so the smaller the commitment you ask for, the greater chance of success in deriving that commitment. I want to hold your hand is less of a commitment than I want to go to bed with you.
Right? Well, if you put it that way.
so small commitments first.
Now,
everybody's got this hair up their ass. They think that they got to get that they're worth 2.5 or 3%, and they have to get that commitment right up front. And the fact is that we all recognize that until a couple of months ago in real estate, whether people want to admit it or not, they work for free initially. That's the way it is. And you take people out, you show them property. How many times did you get paid to show people property? The answer is you probably never got paid to show people property, but at some point you wrote a contract, and that's when you started to work towards the commitment to get paid. But initially you did it for free. And so now that you have to have a written agreement, you can have a written agreement and just realize and be willing to show property for free like you always did. And make sure that the term of that agreement is short. Make sure that because here's what everybody's afraid of. Once I commit to an amount, I'm stuck and I can't go back and change the contract, and that's a gray area. Well, you're never going to, never's a wrong word, but I don't think you're going to ever be held liable for the terms of an expired contract. And so if I agreed to a certain percentage and that contract expires, I don't have to worry. I'll just write a new contract. I'm not bound by the first. Okay, I listed your property for sale for 2.5%. And now I'm stuck forever, even after it expires. I have to always offer it for that amount. No, once a contract expires, it expires. I can ask you to sign a new contract with a new commitment. So I just met you, and I'm going to take you out and show you property. Now, the law requires that the settlement requires that I ask you to sign an agreement. I'm going to ask you to sign an agreement. I'm not going to charge you to show you property. I'm going to charge you $1. This contract is going to expire in 3 hours. And if in 3 hours you decide you wanted to buy something, then we'll write up a buyer broker agreement. And that's when I'll be, now during that 3 hours, I have an opportunity to build rapport. I have an opportunity to build trust and confidence. You see, if I just met you, my reservoir of trust is minimal. Matter of fact, I got nothing in my reservoir of trust. And I need to win your trust. And and typically in real estate, when we're meeting with new people, we build trust when we show them real estate. When we work with them and we build that reservoir of trust. Now, if it's a referral or it's somebody who I know, then I'm further down the line towards I can ask for more of a commitment. But I got to build trust to build more commitment. So John and I, we believe that what you do is this Zillow's idea, they call it a touring agreement, but the idea of a very short term, so you're not stuck with something, a very short-term agreement to show property for a nominal amount of zero to a nominal amount of money. And then as you do that, you explain how it works and you explain how you're going to ask them to sign a contract that's going to commit them, right? And you go through however it is you're going to conduct your business, and you're going to ask the seller to pay and all of that. But at least now you have an opportunity to present that in a productive way when you're showing them real estate. And it's not like you're saying I'm worth nothing. Oh, you don't have to get that commitment right now.
No.
I'd be happy if I hold your hand. I'd be happy if I get a good night kiss. I'd be right. I mean, it's like one step.
Whoa, hold on, Saul. That's too much. We need slower. That you jumped a lot of bases.
Yeah. Okay. I want you to sit next to me first of all, I got to get you to sit next to me on the bench seat of my 56 Chevy, right?
Oh,
One
that's funny.
step at a time.
So, John, yeah, we decided to go ahead and start the update. Guys, if you're listening in, this is episode 19. We just jumped right into it. We're talking about the latest with NAR, and we've got John Riley, Saul Klein. Thanks for joining us again. John, what do you think, man? What do you think about what Saul is talking about, moving in slowly along the lines of what the Zillow tour agreement was saying?
Yeah, I kind of think that's a good way to look at it. It's in several steps, and what you want to have is a basic, simple agreement allowing you to show the property, but not make the ultimate commitment. And when I look at the NAR settlement language, it does allow you to have and work with just a written agreement, different from a full agency agreement. That's the one you would get after you've developed this relationship that Saul has talked about. So it really is several steps in my mind, as opposed to trying to get the full agreement before you even show the property, and then you're going to be straddled with that throughout the transaction. It's probably going to shock a lot of buyers that they have to just sign a long agency agreement just to see a property.
That's very true. I think going back to now where we started with this conversation, which was one question. By the way, everyone listening in or watching, we got a whole bunch of questions inside of the webinar that we did last week. We had 3,500 of you register for it. So a lot of questions. Number 23 on our list was, what happens if the buyer has no money, but can't put zero in the buyer broker agreement, right? That's where this all started from. And Saul saying, well, hold on. I think there's the idea that we have to have a buyer broker agreement to start. And that is not the case. I think everyone's jumping to it, right? And of course, that's the best case scenario for us. But is it the best case scenario for the consumer all the time?
How do you build trust and confidence?
Yeah.
Go back to You know, you have to have a pool or a reservoir of trust. And if this is a new buyer for you, you probably don't have that yet. And so you need time with them to build it. So when are you going to get the time? They're not going to sign. Most people are not going to sit down and sign a commitment to pay you something before they know you.
That's right.
Give them a chance to know you. You say, well, I can't put zero. Well, you put zero and have it expire. Now, key to this approach is short expirations, right? You want it to expire so you're not bound by that zero. You're not bound by that small amount. That's a cursory amount just so you can spend the time with them, so you can build trust and confidence, so you can explain fiduciary duties, so you can explain the ramifications of the settlement, why it's important, how you're compensated.
Oh.
You want to do that while you're doing something productive. You don't want to try to do that before you take them out and show property to them.
Yeah, well, I'll give you something that I'm watching because I've been talking to some top agents across the nation after our webinar, and I'm watching a few things happen differently. So one of them is they're meeting the buyer. They're meeting the buyer before they create any relationship. They're either meeting them in person, but mostly they're meeting through Zoom, which is great. So I meet like you guys, we're talking, and then I'm saying, hey, look, here's how we function, everyone. Buyers, here's how we function. And here is the commission that I charge, whatever that is. And now we're going to, and this is from the agents I'm talking to, we're going to attempt to get that directly from the seller. If by any chance they don't pay us that full amount that we want, the rest of it is going to fall on you, Mrs. Buyer, Mr. Buyer. And I want you to be clear on it. So here's what that looks like, right? And so far, the agents that I've talked to have been getting that signed. That's one approach, right? The other approach, and this is where I need your feedback on, okay? The other approach, I think, falls in a gray area, and this is where we're going to have to figure out if this works, okay? The other approach is we have a get together, whether it's the first time seeing a home because we're using a very low barrier to entry document, the Zillow tour guide, right? Something like that. Saying, yeah, I'll show you a property. Listen, you don't owe me anything. You're just going to see this property and that's it. Or maybe two properties, or at the end of the day, go see it. Then they're like, yeah, we want to work together. This is great. But Tristan, we just can't afford you, right? And then here's the part that I'm seeing some other agents do. Don't worry about it. Our goal is still going to be to attempt to get whatever our compensation is from the seller. If the seller doesn't grant us that, don't worry about it. You won't owe me anything because this is completely negotiable. That's the other piece that I'm seeing, right? But that part I think I'm unclear about because I don't see anywhere in the post-settlement thing, that it says that we can't negotiate that after. Like, hey, I just changed my mind. I don't want to charge them anything. Where does that leave us, guys? Is there an answer?
Well, I think there is an answer to the fact that if you don't want to charge, you don't have to, because you could release them from that obligation if you wanted to release them from that obligation. I don't think that's a question.
Okay.
You, John?
No. The question I have is, if you go in though with an agreement, can you amend that agreement? And that's one that's a little bit I'm not that clear about.
That's what I'm not clear about.
I'd rather have a short-term agreement to get acquainted with the property, with the people, and if that expires by its term, and then later you don't have an agreement with the buyer, with the buyer agency agreement, that's fine. But if you are trying to get all of this at the time of showing, get it all agreed finally, to then amend that later on, I think it's more difficult.
Well, and John, I think that to amend it from an amount to a smaller amount, nobody's going to question you on that. It's to amend it from a smaller amount to a larger amount. For one
That's wait, well,
reason,
because that's written out in the settlement, it says you
yeah,
cannot do that. So
can't
that
do
makes
that.
sense. Yeah.
But to go less, that's not an issue. That's in matter of fact, that's in the consumer's best interest for you to decide to charge less. And so I don't see any issue. But again, John, we've had this discussion. We think that early on, as you get used to, remember, best practices, we're not going to know best practices for 6 months. We're not going to know this for a while. So, try it, and shorter term, where the contract expires, now you don't have to worry about amendments
Mhm.
because the contract's expired. And so now you begin anew.
Yeah, well, here's a question on the shorter term contracts, because if I do a shorter term contract, and this is from what's happening right now as I'm watching it, and you guys too. If we have a shorter contract, and John, let's say you have a listed property, and I'm going to call you as an agent, and because I've got this client who wants to see your home short term, actually just for your property, that's it. And I'm calling you. It's like, hey, are you participating in buyer broker compensation? Right? I'm calling you, and you're like, yeah, we're participating in this, right? That's my call to you, and you're telling me yes. I say, great. And then I go back and I say, great, we're all set, right? But here's the challenging part. If you say no, I'm not, but go ahead and submit an offer. And I already had a conversation with this buyer because it's just for this property. And then I've said to them, yeah, I'll go show it to you. Don't you feel like it's a possible lawsuit situation if now I stop? And because I know agents, you guys know agents, some agents out there are going to be like, well, I can't show this property, but I forgot to tell the buyer that I couldn't show this property because there's no compensation. Now, what the hell are you going to do? Because agents are going to find themselves in this situation, especially the not professional ones, man. We're watching it happen.
Well, one of the issues is, the settlement says that you can't have any offers of compensation in the MLS itself.
Yep.
I think you're talking about, can they do it by a phone call off the MLS?
Yes.
Right now, they appear that they can, although I do know some brokerages that are really trying to discourage that type of offer even off the MLS.
Yeah, I'm hearing that too.
That to me is the kind of the gnarly question. And I think some of the conservative brokerages are avoiding that broker to broker type of offer of compensation right now.
Any pre-knowledge of anything, any fees being paid, open you up to accusations of steering.
Yep.
And so, and I know I've heard already some listing agents won't tell you.
Yep. I'm watching it. That's
right?
what I'm
And what
telling
they say is present an offer.
you. Yeah.
Present an offer. Right. So we have these conversations here in our MLS about what can we put in the remarks section.
0.
Right. And so what I'm thinking in my mind is if I were listing real estate today, I might put something in there like present all offers. Present all offers. Doesn't that in a way convey that you're open to negotiation? Seller will entertain all offers.
Well, hold on, Saul. It's a really good point, actually. I don't know that it's customary yet, but I see where you're going. Like a year from now, that terminology could mean exactly what you're saying. And you're right. I didn't think about that. Interesting. But then would we get in trouble because now it's customary and that's what it means?
Well, it may be, but that's a whole nother situation. But in this case, I believe, at least currently, what that encourages is negotiation.
Yeah, it does. And that's what the Department of Justice wants.
That's what everybody wants.
Negotiation.
Seller will entertain all offers.
And if you did have a listing broker who would be having that phone conversation and
Mhm.
talking about, a certain amount. And then he goes into continuing to work on the transaction with this broker, and they finally get into closing that sale. And there's no written documentation about what they had talked about. And the listing broker is going, wait a minute, I never did put that in writing, did I? And the buyer broker had assumed before they could rely on the MLS, right? And arbitration and
Yeah,
all of
because
that.
that bound us
Now
together.
they don't have it. Yeah.
Hey, so Tristan, I want to change the subject.
Shoot.
Have you read that realtors in Michigan are suing the local associations, the Michigan Association, and the National Association of Realtors for violations of antitrust?
No, dude.
So
Now I have to Google this. Hold on. Michigan agents
are suing,
do wow.
right? They're suing the
Okay.
big MLS in Michigan is RealComp.
Gotcha.
And this new litigation is realtors suing, and what they're suing over is what we call in California and in Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, illegal tying. Now,
Illegal
there
time.
a lot of this is prefaced on the current settlement, but the bottom line is they're suing, they're saying that you must be a member of the realtor organization
I
to
see.
belong to the MLS in Michigan, and that's a violation of the antitrust laws. Now, in California, about 1978, we had Marin County, Paulson versus Marin County, and in California, it was decided that it was an illegal restraint of trade. It was illegal tying to require that somebody join the realtor organization before they could join the MLS. So in California, it's been this way since the 70s. You
Mhm.
don't have to, and I've read this new complaint. It says recently. It ain't recently.
Yeah.
Right? It's a long time ago. In California, we got a decision that said, and NAR couldn't do anything about it. You don't have to be a realtor to join the MLS.
Yeah.
There was another case in, I can't remember the district, but it's a district that encompassed Florida, Alabama, and Georgia called the Thompson case. And in the Thompson case, same idea. That was actually settled, where you don't have to be a realtor to belong to the MLS, because it's like, if you can't belong to the MLS, you can't sell real estate. And so they can't force you to join one organization to have access to something that's required for you to be able to earn a living. That's illegal tying. But in some states,
Mhm.
you must be a realtor. Now, NAR gave up on this a number of years ago as well, but in some states, Michigan evidently being one of them, I think Illinois is one of them, I think Texas is one of them, you have to be a realtor or
That's
you can't
crazy.
join the MLS.
How
And
did
so,
that sneak by for years? They didn't change that?
yeah, some states haven't changed it.
That's
So
crazy.
it's the news. Go to Inman.
I
And
just
it's
found it
one
on
of the lead
Housing Wire.
stories.
I prefer Housing Wire over Inman. Just saying.
Or go to housing, you'll read, you'll see it everywhere, but it has to do with illegal tying. And now they tie in, no pun intended, they tie in the current NAR settlement. And it's pretty interesting. I think it's a 16-page complaint. And it's something that we ought to go through, read through, talk about, because I think that you're going to find that you don't need to, even in those states where it's required, you're going to see. And as a matter of fact, that illegal tying, there was, I think I sent you an executive order from a couple of years ago where the current administration said that they were going to be looking for, let me see if I can bring it up, because it is pretty interesting.
Also, Tristan,
Yeah.
in an email I sent you, I gave you a link to NAR has a excellent discussion of these cases that Saul's talking about non-member access.
The membership agreement under challenge, is that the one? Yeah, that's the one. Let me share that one for those of you that are watching on YouTube. And if you're not, don't worry, we're going to read some of this for you. Here
Yeah.
it is. John, thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. John sent this over to us. NAR broker policy of three-way membership agreement under challenge, Michigan case roadmap number 2.
And down to the reference section, they have the second link there, talks about the non-member access.
Right
Yeah, and
here.
it's really,
And that talks about the tying arrangement.
yeah, and it's really not the three-way agreement that we're really talking about here. It's forcing you to join the Association of Realtors to join the MLS. And I
Yeah.
mentioned this executive order. It says the FTC, and this is relevant to the settlement.
Okay.
The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, charged by the administration to look at unfair tying practices or exclusionary practices in the brokerage or listing of real estate and any other unfair industry specific practices that substantially inhibit competition. This is a document that was published by on July 9th, 2021 by the executive department, by the executive branch of government. So the FTC, now, one of the things we're seeing with this case, with the NAR settlement, is that there's so much confusion, and this just adds to the issue,
Yeah.
that we might see the Department of Justice step in and ask the Federal Trade Commission to get involved, where you have national enforcement
Holy
of
crap,
all of
dude.
this.
Wait, first we're waiting for the Department of Justice to step in between now and sometime in November. And now we're saying the Department of Justice not only will step in, but they're going to tap the FTC to be like, hey, we need help. Here you go. We're over here.
The FTC is the enforcement arm of the Department of Justice.
It's so crazy, man.
And we're handing them a lot of good avenues that they can go against the real estate industry. I mean, the plaintiffs in the case that in Michigan was interesting because they're being upset in that they have to pay this money, and they're upset with the decision that what they call the guaranteed broker commission, which is the offer of compensation, has been taken away from the MLS, and it says that it's greatly diminished any value created by compulsory membership requirement. So I know that the DOJ is going to be watching this case very, very closely.
You think about this, they're suing the MLS and the association for taking away the offer of compensation.
That's the ironic part, yeah.
Yeah, it's right over here, which you sent me over. Greatly diminished. Let me see if I can highlight it there. Right, that section that you're talking about, guys. Greatly diminished any value created by the compulsory membership requirement policy by defendants. That's crazy.
And the guaranteed broker commission, which is the offer of compensation.
Yep, right there. All right. Then I want to just so I understand where we're at. What happens next through these next August, September, October, November? I know we're waiting for the election, right? November 6th, I think it's November 6th for the election. And then this whole thing gets signed into effect by the courts November 26th. But what happens between now and then, or what do you think happens between everything that you're seeing out there?
Well, for me, I'm waiting for August 17th.
Oh, which is just a few days away.
Right. So here in San Diego, we took the CBB field out. We took that guarantee of commission out of our MLS yesterday.
Oh.
Right. So if you go into our MLS, we had to give ourselves some time to make sure that we took it out of because there's a lot of places you have to remove it. And technologically, there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through to get this done and get it done right. And we wanted to make sure people had an opportunity to get used to this before the mandatory date. And so the mandatory date is Saturday, but we actually took it out of our MLS yesterday, and we figured that the phone might be ringing off the hook yesterday. And I'm glad to say at this point in time that that the number of calls has been at a minimum. The communications have at a minimum. Now we've done our best to communicate with people that this was going to happen. And so we think that either nobody's showing property or they're all used to this, they've gotten used to the idea that the MLS will no longer state the amount of commission or any commission being offered to somebody who represents a buyer. So we'll see how it shakes out. But so far, things are good. You're on mute.
You,
Sorry. Is your MLS the one in San Diego? All of us, well, John's in Hawaii, but Saul, you and I in California. And does your MLS allow now concessions? What does that look like as far as concessions? That's different. And we talked about it last week.
Yeah, so sellers can make concessions. The question is, how do you state that in the MLS so it doesn't look like it's a substitute for compensation? So if in fact, for a legitimate reason, and that's something I don't know what's legitimate in the seller's mind, but if the seller wants to offer concessions ahead of time, which I think is kind of dumb, why should you come to the table and lay your cards on the table before you have to?
Yep.
But if you want to, in our MLS, if you want to offer concessions or the seller wants to make it known, then you can do so in remarks section. We don't want you to put any numbers in there. Again, I think that the best language is that the seller's willing to entertain offers. Seller's willing to entertain all offers.
That makes a lot of sense.
Call for questions. Call if you have questions. Rather than say the seller's willing to make concessions. Because I think based on the timing, if you do that, it's pretty obvious that this is an attempt to work around the intention of the settlement and of the litigation. And I don't think as a realtor, you want to be caught attempting to violate anything that has to do with antitrust. The Department of Justice is probably watching everybody. And I would just caution people to be careful.
if you're doing it broker to broker, that's the real dangerous part. But what I see some firms doing is in the listing presentation, and they're talking to a sophisticated seller, and the seller says, I know how it works in real estate, and I know there's always a co-op. I'm okay with offering compensation to a co-op, and I'll do it by way of a direct agreement. And I've seen brokerages come up with the agreement that is an offer directly from the seller to the buyer broker about making a concession and agreeing to it in that separate agreement. And I think I just looked at the CAR has a form in which they have for direct compensation as well.
But
that's a possibility.
Having said that, John, in the statement of interest in the MLS PIN case by the DOJ, I think the DOJ makes it very obvious they don't like that. The DOJ does not care for that. And although the settlement doesn't preclude that action, the DOJ, if they had their way, would probably not allow it.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. That makes sense. All right, so 17th, we fix these situations. People hopefully don't freak out. We figure it out. What do you think happens next? What's our concern for the month of September and October?
Well, for me, it's people getting used to getting some kind of written documentation from a buyer before they show a property. That's the first step. People have to learn how to do that. The more complex commitments, that's obviously going to take your more sophisticated agents, people who've been in the business for a longer period of time, people who have a built-in clientele already, people who trust them. they're going to be able to extract greater degrees of commitment than newer agents, less experienced agents, or people working with brand new buyers they've never worked with before. So start to get used to written documentation on the buy side. And I think that's what we need to see more of here in the next couple of months, because it will be mandatory come Saturday.
That's very true. John, what about you?
Oh, I see a role for company trainers getting involved and professional trainers in helping along the path to get there, where you have written agreements that will stand behind your policy. Reviewing your company policy is going to be an important thing for the managing brokers. Essential. You might not have looked at that policy for years, but now is the time to look at it.
I have a question about that, and then we could wrap it up and then do this next week, which would be great and fun. By the way, if you're missing out on our webinars or any of these episodes, we've got them all on YouTube and on Apple and Spotify and everywhere else. But here's my question. Some big companies out there, brokerages, I feel like have put their head in the sand because you brought up policy, John. And I'm like, some of these companies haven't talked about this to their agents because some of them are on my team, as my team is split between brokerages. We work as a referral, right, team. And they've come to me to tell me, hey, and these are big agents. They're like, my company has not talked about this. What happens then? Because you guys were watching this.
Our first word of advice to everybody is ask your broker. Oh, first thing is ask your broker. Now, if your broker isn't paying attention to this,
Yes.
there's something missing. And I can say, I know a couple of the biggest, I get to talk to everybody in San Diego, and some of the biggest brokerage firms, franchises, we're all familiar with them. They've been training for a long time here in San Diego. And I got to think that's probably nationwide with some of the big franchises and the big companies, the big brokerage firms. That surprises me, Tristan, that some of the big firms haven't done any training or conversation about this. And I don't know, John, it would surprise you. That would surprise me if they're of any size. And I would think more of the mom and pop, the smaller brokers would be the people that really don't have the resources and the wherewithal to really get in and spend the time and understand this and have the legal counsel. But there's no excuse for the big companies. If the brokers haven't prepared for this, then they almost deserve what they're going to get.
Yeah. And I think this is also why we're doing this, right? We saw an opportunity to help out all the other brokers, teams, agents that just aren't getting the information they need. So we're trying to put this into small chunks so people can digest it and at least stay up to date somehow.
Yeah.
And that's the whole purpose of this. So next week, guys, we're going to meet up a bigger group live. We'll go into talking about what's happening, like what are we seeing as far as working with buyers, approaching the listing agent and contracts. It'll be fun. I'm always excited to talk to you guys because I'm always learning. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Tristan. Great to see you. John Riley, get back to the beach.
John, stop working, damn it. Stop it.